Hello, Monday, World Economic News. The world is still turning out there. Graphic below is put together by some Californian chap, I forget his name. But the first link is obviously to his little article about this GDP thing, and it is well worth a whole read through. It's only about 3 pages, and it's worth a go because it certainly made me think about GDP a lot more. I was getting to the idea that it was a stupid measure of anything. It measures something, obviously, but it's not. I couldn't put my finger on why it was ridiculous, and I don't know that I still can totally put my finger on why it's ridiculous, but I've got a better idea from this document put together, and we can fire off this chart. What he's done is to get various bits of data and throw them into this chart to try and help us make sense of things. Now let's start with the blue line that's on top, and that is real per capita GDP. Now per capita, what he's done, going back to 1944, he's backed out any increases from population. More population leads to more GDP because there are more people to do more things. So he's backed that out as as a part of GDP, which seems quite sensible because it's not demonstrative of being dynamic that there are just new people arriving. I mean, it is in a way that the people want to arrive and people want to have babies, but it's not. It shouldn't be as part of GDP. Let's say the government shouldn't get bonus points for people having babies. And this whole thing has been done in inflation balanced. So it's either in 2010 money or 1944 money and adjusted. And it's all adjusted for inflation as well. Now, when he says real per capita GDP, that's just it. That's as you hear it on Bubble Vision, and that's television GDP. And you can see it's done what it's done. Now, I've put that black line in because that vertical black line, because I think round about the year 2000 things seemed to change. But in that real GDP one, there was the run up from 2000 up till the crash. No particular problem there. The next one, the mucky yellow one, is real structural per capita GDP. Now, if I've got this right, what he's done is back out federal debt, any extra federal debt. He's taken that out. He would have taken out all debt, but he says in a little footnote below that a lot of private debt is taken out and it's collateralized. So it's not just like borrowing for the future. It's borrowing on something. It's balanced by a house or a car. Now, a lot of that, obviously, we know about home equity lines of credit and things that really weren't, but only because the price of houses went down. But he's only backed out federal spending, and we can see it's not nearly so dynamic looking at all. In fact, that he's made these across the it's the left-hand axis has given us he's made it in dollars, so it's easy enough to understand in dollars. And you can go back to 1996 to find out roughly where we are now. We've got back out federal spending, and we're no better than we were in 1996. The next one, the greeny blue one, private sector real GDP, he's backed out federal spending, state and local governments. And we can see that it's pretty similar, that we haven't improved anything in the last 12 years. Because GDP you can get just by local people putting out a bond, borrowing money and spending it, just like the federal government can borrow money and spend it. And the idea is that can be good. I mean, if you do invest, you can reap more later. But the idea of that private one is that the mucky greeny blue one is to say that, well, if the federal, local and state are borrowing, they're borrowing to reap later. But it isn't meant for them to reap later, except reap enough to pay back their loans. It's for the private sector to have an atmosphere that it can flourish in, and that, new swimming baths, new schools, and whatever it might be, should be so the private sector can get on and flourish. But we can see from that the private sector isn't flourishing, and basically what he's saying is, then is this federal, local and state spending actually doing anybody any good if the private sector isn't flourishing? That's the plan. The bottom two are just, we now know what real per capita federal receipts and outlays might be. He's just backed out some stuff there, and that's money going into the Washington and coming out, and we can see the way it's blown open since the recession. So we've got that about GDP and how interesting it is. But really, if you back out, if you ignore that blue one at the top, we can see the yellow one and the green one, with the government borrowing and state and local borrowing backed out. We ain't going nowhere. Well, it's representative of the United States, but I would think that pertains to quite a few places. The actual federal borrowing isn't doing anybody any good. It's just being borrowed and spent just to keep that blue line up so it looks good on television. Right. Right, we'll go to Denninger and his version of this. It's a version I've had before, so I won't take too much time on it. Nominal GDP, federal deficit. So the nominal GDP is, the last fella had it in dollars. This is the percentage one, where you get on the television and the NBER judges whether there is a recession going on. And as you can see, that the middle green one said there was a recession because it dipped below the zero line for long enough, but now it's back up again at near 4%. But what Denninger is saying is the blue line, which is the federal deficits as a percentage of GDP, should be taken off, as per the last chap, and then you get the red line, meaning that the actual GDP, according to Denninger, is about -8%, which is a whole different ball game. And it has been really on and around zero since the year 2000, before this recession where it's really gone negative. Next chart is corporate debt. They say that the corporates have got all this spare money, but they've also got more debt than they've ever had. They've got lots of cash, but they've also got lots of debts. In fact, if you back the debts out of the cash that they've got, it's not that impressive at all. But that's corporate debts from 2000, going from just over 4 trillion up to 7.5 trillion. So corporate debt, and you can work out whether that should be, if that's borrowed and spent, should be in GDP. Consumer debt, 6 trillion to 14 trillion. This was a huge, what can you do? What can the federal government do? They got people in America borrowing and spending on houses, the most expensive thing they can spend on. So it's the entire population of America buying the most expensive things they'll buy on credit, with debt. So how could that ever be sustainable, and what can replace it? And you can see that huge rise, 6 to 14 trillion, and now it's gone down. This one I don't totally understand. It's a Denninger chart, and it's debt and GDP. I think in blue he's got all the debt that he can find and the GDP along the bottom, but you can follow the link and try and work it out for yourself. I don't totally understand it, but there is certainly a story going on between debt and GDP. And this one is that sad story of the house buying, that huge quantity of money, 6 trillion up to 14 trillion. So that's 8 trillion borrowed to buy houses. And this is chart of the day, median single family home. This is adjusted for inflation prices. And you can see that the median house price went up to 260, but it's now down to 160. This seems a bit radical to me, but I mean, it's chart of the day, and they're normally very good, their chartoftheday.com charts. And the 160 was first broken up in about 1986, so it's been a huge up and down. And what can replace that huge borrowing, and what can replace that damage that's been done to the bank's books? Because though that represents an awful lot of losses on banks' books, or is structured investment books on whoever's holding the structured investments, the securitized loans. I'll just finish with this one, which is Americans involved in manufacturing going back to 1970, where it was 70s to 80s, it rattled between 18 and nearly 20 million people involved in manufacturing, and it's plummeted down to 12 million. And I've put that there to kind of try and link it to the GDP and try and answer the question of what is money, what is wealth, what is whatever. And is production of real things actually necessary to an economy? Can economies actually run on service, just combing each other's hair? And I'll finish with this one off the St. Louis Fed, which is the equivalent one for the United Kingdom, which was back to 1970, people involved in manufacturing, and it was 8 bloody million then, 8 bloody million in 1970, of real people doing real work, really making real bloody things. And then came Mrs. Bloody Thatcher, and now it's 3 bloody million. Nearly nobody's making nothing. And this is the trouble that the Bank of England have got now. They've slashed 20% off the value of the pound, so exports of real bloody things can be done from the United Kingdom, but the manufacturing base has been so gutted that they're not getting those exports because there's no bloody bugger there to make them. Have a good week. Bye.